Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in this video today, we are going to be talking about how to decorate organic modern. Organic modern is a very hot interior design style. It's been really popular, I would say, for the last few years. And this is really an extension of modern design. And it's just a really interesting, beautiful design style that you're seeing being really popular in recent years. So I want to do a video on how to do it. Now, I've done these types of videos before. There's a playlist I'll link at the end of this video for you. I've done Scandinavian, Art Deco, mid-century modern, Japandi, bunch of different design styles, but I wanted to talk about organic modern. These videos are typically structured where I explain what the design style is, who's it for, who's it not for, tips on how you can achieve that style, as well as some retailers that I think you should check out if you like this particular style. Let's get going. Okay, so what is organic modern? Well, I think the first thing that's really important to know is what is modern design, because it really borrows a lot from modern design. Obviously, it's in the name, right? So modern design and contemporary oftentimes get confused. I touch on this a lot in my interior design course, which I will link down below, shameless plug. And modern design is not contemporary. So people sometimes think like, I love things that are really modern. I think they oftentimes mean contemporary. They think new and what is really popular right now. So contemporary design in 1974 was not the same as contemporary design now. Not even the same as it was in 2004, right? Contemporary sort of changes and shifts as, you know, things become really popular and we get certain trends coming in and out of style. Contemporary is constantly changing. Modern, on the other hand, is really describing that post-World War II era, taking us kind of up until sort of the 70s. So really that mid-century period is what we're really referring to when we're talking about modern design. And some iconic design came out of modern design. There's some fantastic designers that are very popular in this style. You might be familiar with a lot of them, and that's really what is so iconic about this particular design style. So what is organic modern that we've seen lately, and how is it different than modern design of the past? But as an overview, modern design really has a lot of minimalism, a lot of generally clean, simple shapes, a lot of basic shapes, and that's really rooted in the fact that, you know, this is that post-World War II era. We saw a lot more new materials coming to be used, so plastics and plywoods and things like that you never really saw in traditional design. Things tended to be a lot more mass-produced post-World War II, right? We saw the industrialization of furniture, and we saw the proliferation of the suburbs, and we had this huge baby boom, and we needed to make a lot more furniture that was kind of really clean and simple and easy to make for those large and growing families. Traditional design tended to be a lot more handcrafted, a lot more detailed, a lot more ornate in its sort of style. So organic modern takes from that modern ethos of kind of really clean, sort of stripped down shapes being used in its furniture. But unlike modern, the organic piece is, instead of using plastics and, you know, lucite and plywood and things like that, instead we're dealing with a lot more organic materials. So we're dealing with things like wood and stone and jute and cotton and linen, and just much more centered and grounded in sort of organic shapes and organic materials. So with that in mind, that's your quick overview. That's the organic, that's the modern. So let's get to who is this style for and who is it not for. Okay, so who is this style for? I would say if you love really calm, neutral spaces, then I think you might really love this interior design style. This is designed to really create sort of a mood that feels really relaxing, sort of makes you want to feel like you're kind of one with nature. You know how you're walking in the woods and you're just like at peace because you just got maybe a babbling brook in the background there, maybe you got a nice little canopy of trees, maybe birds chirping. If that's the vibe that you're like, how do I take that and bring that indoors? This is gonna kind of get you there. You know what I mean? We're dealing with a lot of those natural materials you're gonna see in nature. You're gonna see those shapes that you see in nature a lot, and therefore it creates a space that feels really serene and really calming. You're not gonna necessarily play with a ton of contrast in color because everything is gonna be sort of in that white, cream, beige, maybe touches of black, right? You're gonna see those sorts of colors and maybe even some muted earth tones like some blues and greens and reds, but you're probably not gonna see some big, bright colors. So if you love that, if you love that calm, relaxing sort of look, you'll probably really like organic modern. So who is this not for? Well, let's say you're a person that doesn't like any of that and looks for like big, bold luxury. You know, they're a person that wants, you know, big statement colors. They want big, you know, pink accent wall, or they want something that feels sort of really glamorous, or, you know, maybe you like things with sequins or jewels, or you like things, you know, you might be a little bit more inclined to choose something like Art Deco, or maybe you love something like postmodern with really big, bold, crazy, funky shapes. If that's more your style, this style's probably not gonna work for you. This style might feel a little boring to you, depending on sort of type of space you want to create. If you love a Hollywood Regency look or something, then this might not be the style for you. This is trying to create that really, wholesome, natural, tranquil sort of mood in a space. And if you love something that always is there to make a statement and it's big and bold, this one's probably a skip for you. Okay, so let's talk about how you can achieve this look. So my first tip for you is natural materials, and I'm gonna also say lots of textures. So natural materials, let's just get out there and say this is the number one probably tip. So when you're touching on the materials that you're using, I would always go for things that are natural. Now, there could be a place for faux items, perhaps if you so choose. I would personally be very cautious with using faux items in this design style, just because people can sometimes tell. So, fake plants, maybe not. Fake flowers might not necessarily work in this style, right? Cotton polyester blends, it might make sense for you. Different performance fabrics, those might make sense for you. But at the end of the day, I would just always encourage you to think, how can I bring in something that is from nature? So what are we talking about? We're talking about wood, we're talking about slate, we're talking about stone, things that bricks perhaps, you might use something like bricks can have an absolute, appeal here. Things that just are really gorgeous, come from nature, they're using those natural materials. So jute, cotton, linen, like I mentioned earlier, these are materials frequently used in this style. Different types of stone as well, right? So granite, marble, limestone, travertine, right? All these different types of stone can be really fantastic in this particular style, I would say. And as well as dealing with sort of those softer plush materials. So things like wool and cotton absolutely have a place in this style as well. And also, kind of like I said earlier, but I think it's worth repeating, I would be very cautious about like really hard lacquered materials. I would be very cautious about plastic, man-made materials, probably not gonna make a whole lot of sense here. Now, I would say maybe that there could be an exception to the rule, could be concrete. So this design style does tend to borrow a lot from Japanese design. That's very, they use a lot of natural materials in their design styles traditionally. And so those can be used. And I would say that concrete does sort of have a place in this style. I would again, just be kind of really cautious about bringing in a lot of man-made materials there, but concrete can make sense because it still reads very natural, even though, it's not, but therefore, it can make sense. So I think, proceed with caution around things like concrete, but it can make a lot of sense here. Okay, next tip I have for you is to use organic shapes. So in nature, things don't always work in a straight line, right? You look at a river, it just doesn't go in a straight line. You look at a tree, it doesn't just grow in a, despite how we draw them on paper, they don't actually really grow in a straight line. Nature doesn't work in straight lines typically. Now, that doesn't mean that straight lines in the design don't have a place. I think absolutely they do, and they can provide an excellent contrast. But I do think it's worth considering organic shapes that are, not necessarily completely perfect in this design. It makes the space feel a lot more dynamic and interesting, and I think it really does add to those natural elements that are important. So yes, obviously we're going to be using natural materials, as I mentioned, but also bringing in those natural shapes is going to make the space feel a lot more dynamic and interesting, because not everything is going to be that straight, flat, clean line like you're expecting from typical modern design, right? So things like, maybe you've got a cowhide rug, so that's, a natural material there. But usually those rugs oftentimes are a little bit, shaped, they're not completely spherical, right? They might not be completely round. And that can be a good thing in this style because it makes it feel a lot more interesting. Things like pendants and chandeliers can be irregularly shaped, and that can be interesting. Bringing in sort of those broken, sort of beautifully, organically shaped objects like decor pieces, again, really borrowing from that sort of wabi-sabi, which is a principle that you see a lot in Japanese design. So things that are imperfectly beautiful, right? Things like an old vase that's been around for 100 years or something that is, it's maybe a little misshapen, it might be a little bit damaged, it might be cracked, but it's beautifully imperfect. And that's what makes sense because that's what we see in nature a lot, right? So bringing in some of those pieces in your decor, perhaps in your furniture, things like rugs, things like lighting, things like art, right? Beautiful art that is maybe a little bit more abstract. It doesn't necessarily just have sort of clean straight lines. It's going to have some organic shapes and texture and stuff to it. That can be really interesting as well. And also in addition to those straight lines, rather than everything being so abstract, there's also just a place for curves in organic modern, because again, so things like, you're seeing a lot of curves in coffee tables, curves in side chairs, curves in sofas, curves in lighting. Like curves have been very popular for a while. They've been very trendy for a while. And that's why this design style, is part of that conversation around that sort of larger trend that's happening. So a lot more interesting curves in spaces, because that you do see those in nature a lot, because again, she doesn't grow in nature does the best, and she doesn't grow in a straight line. Do you know what I mean? And So you're seeing a lot more of those curves being used in furniture and decor pieces, especially in this style. Okay, next up is going to be greenery. So we talked about natural materials, but notice that I didn't say plants, right? Plants are the ultimate natural material to bring into your home. So I think greenery really is used effectively in this design style because it provides that life, literally that life into a space. So rather than just always using natural materials, which of course are wonderful, see point one, bringing in greenery also really helps to make a space feel a little bit more natural. Now, personally, my opinion, this is where we're going into my opinion here for a second, okay? I think sometimes some spaces nowadays can look a little bit like a jungle. I'm not a huge fan of that myself, but that's personal preference. But they can be a little heavy on the plants. Can we agree on that? Some of the TikTok people with the plants is a little bit crazy. So I would say though, that some interesting, beautiful plants always have a place in this style. Adding, again, we can have a gorgeous little rustic pot there, and we can put some beautiful, an olive tree or whatever, a fiddle leaf fig or whatever the most popular tree of the moment is, you can use that. That's always fantastic. So I say bringing in some greenery is a fantastic way to bring some life into the space, provides a little bit of color in an otherwise very neutral sort of space, which we'll get to color in a second. And I think that it's a way to add that little bit of color and life into a space without necessarily committing to, big wild changes in your color palette. Now, a word quickly on the trendy plants. This style is not, just because this feels like a style in the moment, I don't want you to take away from this that this feels like super trendy and then this trend is gonna die and organic modern is gonna go away and be completely stupid in 3-5 years. I can't necessarily predict the future, but I think this is a gorgeous style that will last the test of time. Obviously, all styles do change, but don't get so caught up in the plant trend. So, I think any type of greenery is beautiful. Just pick one that you think is gonna really make sense. Now, organic modern, because it is such a trendy style, it is gonna default to some of those trendy plants, but don't feel like you have to get the trendy plants, okay? You can get whatever plants you want. Any sort of greenery adds life and color into a space and literally oxygen into a space and makes it feel more tranquil and relaxing, which again contributes to the mood that you're trying to create with this style. And then of course, next up here is a neutral color palette. So we've touched on this, but let's talk about it again, which is the importance of neutrals. And really what this is trying to do here is desaturate a lot of those colors in order to make it feel a lot more relaxing and a lot more calming. And I think that's really important with this style. So I'm gonna get out the old color wheel here. So I haven't mentioned this one in a while, but I love the color wheel because I just think it's really important to see how color sort of works, right? So you've got black, you've got white, and you've got gray, right? Those are kind of your ultimate neutrals. And gray is just a mix of black and white, okay? So when you add white to a color, like if you take a primary color like blue, let's say, if you add white to it, it becomes really like a pale blue until it actually looks like white with just a touch of little blue. Like picture an entire white can of paint and then add a little drop of blue in there. It's still gonna read as white, but it's gonna have a slightly blue undertone. Maybe not with one drop, but you add a little bit of blue and it starts to kind of have that blue undertone to it, right? So that is called a tint. That is what that is called. Now, a shade is when you do the same thing, but with black. If you take that primary color blue, you add a bunch of black to it, it's just gonna feel a lot darker. Now, if you were to combine black and white together, it is gray. I know, I haven't really thought of that since grade 3, but yes, black plus white equals gray. So if you take gray and you add it to that primary color, that blue, it's just gonna, appear really desaturated. It's not gonna feel so bright and it's just gonna sort of tone it down a little bit. I think maybe that's where we got that from. So we just tone that color choice down. And what that does is it makes it feel a lot more pleasing, oftentimes to the eye, just in general with design, but it definitely doesn't feel as harsh as it sort of does when you look at the primary hue. So this becomes especially important to understand when we're talking about organic modern, because by creating that mood of trying to create that tranquil sort of environment, color choice becomes really important with this style. So you can use whatever colors you want, of course, although you were defaulting to the ones that are seen in nature a lot, which is why you're gonna see a lot of greens, a lot of reddish browns, and a lot of blues. And the reason, because we see those colors all the time in nature, right? You don't see hot pink in nature very often, and so that is why we're using sort of those colors a little bit more. Obviously they're in flowers and things, so you can do what you want, but I'm just saying those are the most frequently used earth tones that we see. But you're gonna wanna desaturate those colors a little bit. It's gonna feel a lot more calming and a lot more pleasing, and that's why we see them so commonly used in this style. So you're sticking to those whites, those creams, those beiges, those browns, the milk chocolate browns, the dark chocolate browns, right? Maybe the burnt oranges, right? And those blues and greens and reds, but we're sort of desaturating them a little bit just to make them feel a little bit more pleasing and a little bit more tranquil to really just kind of enhance that mood mood that we're trying to create. And also, by the way, so we talked earlier about the importance of natural materials, and I really want to touch on in the color section here, the importance of texture. So texture is what makes the space, I think, feel really interesting and really ties together this whole design style. Because what texture means, it's the visual of actually what things physically feel like, right? So if I were to show you a piece of really smooth wood, and then I were to show you an image of a really rough sort of wood, you know what they would feel like to touch them. So they look different. They add a different sort of element into a space. So when choosing something like wood, it makes a big difference in terms of the wood species that you use because it adds different degrees of texture into it. Now, if I were to take something like piano black laminate and compare that to that same rough wood, it's really going to have a different feel in their space, right? So I think that it's so important to use a lot of texture in this design style for a few reasons. First of all, when dealing with natural materials, you're gonna get a lot of texture because you're gonna deal with those materials like rough wood and travertine and things that are going to have that textural element to them. Things like jute, things like wool, a wool throw, right? It's got that sort of cozy texture. That's really important with this style. But in addition to that, we're dealing again in the lack of color, right? So because our color palette is very desaturated, because we're using a lot of those toned down colors or those just neutrals, it can feel really boring and flat if everything is just a flat surface, right? We're gonna wanna add a lot of texture into it so it creates a lot of visual interest and makes the space still feel dynamic, right? So if we're gonna be using those old clay pots, if we're gonna be using those rough sort of woods, if we're gonna be, using those, linen throws or, things like that, or wool throws or whatever, or those like sort of like sheepskin rugs or things, right? We're adding a lot of that texture because in the absence of color, we're using that to make it feel and look a lot more interesting. Okay, and my next tip here is gonna be to prioritize comfort. So this is something easily missed because there's a lot of kooky crazy designs that are happening in furniture right now these days that are not particularly comfortable. Let's be honest. Do you want to come home and lounge on like a terrazzo, whatever they are? What are they called? Those sofas? Like, do you want to relax? Is this one you're going to take a nap on? Probably not. So there's a lot of uncomfortable sofas that are out there right now. But this style, because we're creating, you've heard it here about 50 times in this video, a very sort of gorgeous, tranquil, calming, relaxing atmosphere. Nothing will destroy that quite like a horribly uncomfortable chair. So I would choose comfortable, interesting, beautiful furniture pieces that are going to feel like you want to relax in them, things that you want to sink into, because that's really part of the conversation about creating a space that fits that mood. So you want to create something that feels comfortable and warm and inviting because that's what you're trying, that's the mood you're starting with this style. In order to do that, you're going to need some really comfortable furniture pieces to go along with them. So prioritize comfort in the furniture choices that you choose. This also matters for things like curves as well, curved dining tables, curved coffee tables, just because they add sort of a softness to the edges, which again, visually does make it feel a little bit more comfortable to navigate a space. So that's another thing to consider when you're choosing the different shapes that we've talked about in this video, is choosing those sort of curvy shapes because they just feel softer to work with and therefore more comfortable to be surrounded by. Okay, where to shop? Where to shop? Well, here's the good news. Unlike some other interior design styles that are out there, say like Art Deco, for example, this style is really easy to shop for because it is very, very popular. I feel like a lot of the modern design elements that we have seen, the mid-century modern, has sort of really shaped into this style. Even arguably farmhouse, I would argue. Modern farmhouse has sort of shifted a little bit and becoming a little bit more like organic modern. So this style is everywhere, so there is no shortage of places to shop. Some of my favorites would be Sunday's Furniture, which I personally love. I love Sundays. You guys hear me talk about it all the time. They don't pay me to say that, but I really do love Sundays. And I think they probably, out of all the retailers I'm gonna mention, are the ones where this is their entire vibe. This is their entire, like, yes, there are other retailers that I'm gonna talk about that do have elements of organic modern. It's easy to shop there, but Sundays, this is their thing. It's relaxing like a Sunday morning. That's their whole vibe. So it sort of fits with this style perfectly. I also have some Sunday's Furniture pieces that I personally really do love. Again, they didn't pay me to say that, but I've linked my favorites, but I do really think that Sundays is gorgeous and their stuff really, really fits into this style. Next up, I would say would be Crate and Barrel is another really interesting retailer that has really leaned into this style. I don't know if you've been to a Crate and Barrel showroom lately, but you can't find a color to save your life. It's a lot of creams, a lot of beiges, and it fits really well with this particular design style. A lot of curvy furniture, you know, you're seeing some of the fuzzy furniture, some, you know, fur, some boucle, like things that are natural materials, but again, very textural, and therefore work really well with this particular style. CB2 as well, although I think CB2 sometimes goes a little bit more Art Deco glamorous in a way, which might not necessarily fit this style perfectly. I think Crate and Barrel is probably a better fit there, but you absolutely can find some pieces at CB2. Lulu in Georgia is another retailer that does a lot of sort of neutrals, a lot of whites and creams and beiges and things, uses a lot of natural materials as well. They're a really good option. But you can also shop at places like Target, and they will have a lot of organic modern as well. They're another great retailer that has lots of options. For some of those handmade pieces, Etsy is really good. I feel like you need to be careful with Etsy lately. There's a lot of drop shipping happening there. I'll leave that up to you. But like finding or thrifting, finding places that sell really old stuff that is gorgeous and beautiful, but might not, you know, doesn't have that sort of clean, mass-produced, you know, shipped off an assembly line sort of look that is obviously so popular in retail here in 2024. So finding those pieces that are, you know, 100 years old, if you can buy vintage pieces, if you can find, you know, some pieces that are, you know, maybe a little broken, a little shapen, might not be necessarily perfect, but are handmade and gorgeous, those are wonderful additions. The good news here also is that I think this style does really well when it leans a little bit more minimal, because if it feels too cluttered, you know, it's not going to necessarily create that relaxed vibe that you're looking for. So having less stuff is probably a good idea. So find less stuff and, you know, be happy with those pieces that are, you know, you might spend a little bit more money to get that vintage piece or that, you know, thrifted find that's going to just be perfect for you. But remember that you're not buying 10 other crappy things that you found on Amazon that week. Do you know what I mean? So to me, I think, you know, it doesn't all happen overnight to build a gorgeous space. Find those really incredible, older, rough, lived in, organic, natural items, decor pieces, and bring those into the space and curate a space that's going to be really gorgeous and beautiful and fit the style. Another couple of sort of accessibly priced retailers that I would consider is Zara Home and H&M Home. Now, Zara Home, I think especially, has a lot of this style. A lot of people hate on Zara and H&M as companies. I hear you, I get it. I will say that if you look at the material choices of those two retailers, often, not always, you can find pieces that are really great quality materials that are using actually, like they're using marble, they're using, I bought a linen tablecloth from H&M Home. Like I have, you know, a throw that is also made of like a cotton linen blend. Like you can find a lot of really great pieces. Now I'm not going to speak to the clothing because we all know you wash it once and it gets thrown away, and that's not good for the environment, and I understand that. I'm not defending the companies, especially the clothing side, but from the furniture and decor stuff, they can be pretty solid. So definitely I would take a look at those two retailers as well. This style is so popular right now that it's not that difficult to find retailers. These are all mainstream guys and you can find it all really easily. So that's it for me today, guys. I'm gonna leave it there. I'm also gonna link here to my playlist of some of my older videos that I did on the subject sort of follows that same sort of format for you for different interior design styles. Go check that one out, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks, bye.